Hello boys and girls of the KSP Club. Today I'm going to show you how to build an orbit capable rocket. We'll talk about the parts briefly and about the very simple mechanics about getting into space, and then we'll do another video later on in more detail. Alright, so I'm starting a new game here, going up to Sandbox so we can have access to all the parts and all the science. Name it whatever you want. I'm going to name mine Retor because that's what I am. And you'll see an option for difficulty there. We're not going to mess with that. I am going to change the flag though. If you are experienced in editing save files, or not save files, but files in general, you can make your own flag if you want. I'm just going to pick one pretty. This one looks good. It's got the Kerbin and the moon in it. That'll represent our goals for the near future, making it into orbit around the moon. Alright, if you start a new game, lots of helpful Kerbals will speak to you about various things. This guy, the flight director, is just letting us know that all these buildings serve a purpose. Here's the administrative building. Not messing with that. Not messing with the astronaut complex. We hire more astronauts there. Don't really need to just yet. Over here is the science facility. In career mode, you unlock technologies through experiment. Here we can look at all the flights that we have and control them. There's the launch pad. And over here is the contracts building, where again it's career mode really only. This is the spaceplane hangar, where as we get more advanced we'll operate out of that more and more often. But we're going to work with the VAB today, the Vehicle Assembly Building. So just click on that and that'll take us inside. Again, we'll have another helpful Kerbal speak to us, the notorious doctor here. He tells us that there are options in here to let us know if our rocket is safe to fly, if it doesn't have a pilot, if it's too heavy, so on and so forth. I click out of that. Now every rocket needs to have a command pod, some way to control the vessel. You can do that either by computer or by pilot. Down here you'll see all the computer probes, all the probe cores. These basically just receive instruction from Kerbin and then affect the changes or the indirections instructions on the vessel with no astronauts at risk. But we're not going to do that. We're going to go up here to the Mark 1. This is the one we're doing, the one that looks like a cone. Click on that. It'll be your first piece, and all the other pieces will be built around it. If you click it as your first piece, an astronaut is guaranteed to be on board when you launch. If not, then you need to make sure later on. Alright, so first things first, safety. We need a parachute. The Mark 16 parachute is the one we messed with on the first day of club. It's good for what we're going to do today. You'll see it's red until I get right on top and it pops on. If I move away from it, it turns red again and won't allow me to click on. Once it reaches a green globe, it'll snap to it. You click to release and then we can move forward. Alright, here in the aerodynamics tab, we've got things like wings and fuselages, but we're not going to mess with that. We're messing with heat shields, because if we're going to get into orbit, that means we're going to be moving at orbital speeds, more orbital velocities, roughly 25 kilometers a second. And if we're going to come back into Kerbin's atmosphere, we need to have a way to enter it safely. You'll see I can right click on any of these parts and get more options. Here we've got the structural tab. We've got all kinds of things like girders, adapters, and decouplers. This is a radial decoupler. It's a big one. It's far too powerful for what we need. What we need is a stack decoupler, and that means it goes underneath. This one is the right size for us. Why do we need a stack decoupler? Because space travel is about efficiency. We want to be able to ditch as much dead weight as possible as soon as possible, so that we can get the most efficient burn and travel time and air time and all that that we can. Right. A small liquid fuel tank here will be just the boost we need to circularize our orbit and then decelerate enough so that we can enter the atmosphere again. This rocket has, if you right click on the items in the inventory, you'll see that more information pops up, like thrust, ISP, specific impulse ratings. This one is good enough for us getting into orbit around Kerbin. Don't worry too much about the science just yet. If I right click on it, you can see I can actually change the amount of liquid fuel and oxidizer in the canister. I can even turn off the flow of liquid fuel and oxidizer from this canister by clicking these buttons, but I'm not going to do that. Leaving it as is. You'll see I've got 3 stages now in on the right here. Parachute will be the last. It's at the top. Rocket will fire, we'll decouple it, and the parachute will hit. I'm going to put another stack decoupler on the bottom here. Why? Because that stage is our orbital insertion stage. This one is our ascent stage, so we'll need more fuel. This one is twice as big as the first one. We're going to put on a bigger rocket that has higher thrust and not so great specific impulse. What is specific impulse? Basically, it's the efficiency with which the rocket burns the fuel. It doesn't really matter just yet. Don't worry about that just yet. You'll see this one looks very similar. The difference is that it's a little heavier, I think, but also it's got something called thrust vectoring, gimbaling, which allows us to move the bell of the rocket around to change our direction. We're not going to worry about that just yet. This is a radial decoupler, which simply means it goes on the side. Now, if I put it on the side here, you see I can move it all around. I've only got the one selected. We need to have symmetry on our rocket. We need to have two, one on either side. I'm going to plop that down and come down to the bottom left of my screen. There's two circles here. This one, the single dot. I click on it. Now I've got two pie slices. That means that now, wherever I put my decoupler, another one will appear on the exact opposite side of the rocket. It's still a little open to interpretation. So I'm going to click this one and switch over to snap mode. Snap mode means that now my pieces will only go to specific orientations around the rocket, guaranteeing a nice symmetrical build. I'm going to plop it right here on the side, and I know for a fact now that they are exactly on the side and exactly symmetrical. We need solid rocket boosters. Solid rocket boosters we messed with a little bit. We messed with the flea. It was cool. It was powerful. It was lightweight. It was great for what our intents were, but now we're trying to get into orbit, so we need a little bit bigger. This is twice as big as the flea, and it's a solid rocket booster, which means that as soon as I turn it on, it's going to burn until all the fuel is gone. If I look in here, I can see that I can reduce the amount of thrust coming out the back, and I can reduce the amount of fuel coming out the back, which means that I can use it to a high degree of specificity later on for real fine tuning. This one I could use too. I could stick this right on the bottom, but if I look at the differences between the two of them, that one weighs a little over twice as much and with not as much thrust as the ones that we were looking at just a minute before. So we're going to take the smaller and stick them right on the side here. Now, we've got solid rocket boosters, but they're a little higher than the bell of our main engine. So with this tool, we can bring up these three-directional slider bars, an X, a Y, and a Z axis. I'm going to use the Z axis, that's the green arrow, and drop these down so that the bells of the SRBs are parallel or a little bit farther down than the bell of the main engine. Why? Because on the launch pad, when this thing takes off, I don't want it to be wobbling. You can see I can do this with any part. I can use the radial decouplers and bring those down, or I can do the SRBs. Now, on top of the SRB, we've got a flat surface. The flat surface means that it'll be impacting the air we're traveling through rather bluntly and obliquely. So that'll create drag, that'll slow us down, that'll reduce efficiency. So we can go to the aerodynamics tab here and find a nose cone that'll fit perfectly right on top of these SRBs, meaning we can slip effortlessly through the air as we travel to space. In addition to nose cones, we're going to need some control surfaces. Control surfaces do two things. They increase the amount of drag at the back end of our rocket, which makes it more stable. We can use these little guys, which don't really allow us to change our vector at all. Or we can use something bigger, and you can see at the bottom of these little winglets, we've got flaps. These flaps will allow us to articulate the path of air around those fins and change the direction of our vessel through an atmosphere. Once we get to outer space, they'll be utterly useless, which is why by the time we get there, we're going to have ditched this bottom stage. Now at the bottom, you can see I've clicked on one of three tabs. These little buttons down here show us the perceived centers of mass, centers of thrust, and centers of lift. You can see they fall neatly right in the middle of the rocket. If I take off one of my SRBs and pop it back on, just the one, you'll see that the center of mass has moved over to the left, and the center of thrust has moved over slightly farther. Now when I go up just like this, that means that I'm going to be tilting because of mass to the left, but the thrust being further out is going to be pushing me ever to the right, and I'll end up curving over and crashing into the earth. To prevent that, we're going to have two SRBs symmetrically placed on either side, meaning we'll have mass equally distributed on the vessel, placing the center of mass right in the middle and the center of thrust directly at the bottom in the middle, which is crucial. If I select the third option, which shows the center of lift, you can see the little blue ball just underneath the center of mass. I'm going to use the slider tool and slide the winglets up towards the front of the ship. That's bad. The center of lift should never be above the center of mass, because the drag at the front of the ship will invariably force the rocket around and we'll be facing backwards. We don't want that. We want to be going away from Kerbin, so we're going to bring that back down behind the center of mass. Often you want to have that as far behind as possible. After I name this ship, we'll save this vessel by clicking on the sort of gray-blue tab right in the middle of the buttons at the top right of the screen, and then launch the ship by hitting the green button right next to that. On Monday, I told you that the Mark I has devices on board to allow the vessel to reorient in space or orient in a different direction in space without the use of compressed gas. To activate that ability, we're going to mouse over the top right of the nav ball here and click on the SAS button. SAS, that's Stability Assist. This will pop up on the left-hand side. This allows us to pick an orientation with regards to Kerbin. We're not going to mess with that too much. You can click it off or click it on with the mouse, or you can use the T key on the keyboard, T as in Thomas. RCS is something else. That's a reaction control. We don't have that installed on our vessel, so we're just going to click it off and forget about it until next time. On the left-hand side of the navigation ball, you'll see a little arrow with gauge. And if I hold the shift key, that means I throttle up. If I hold the control key, it means I throttle down. I can change the throttle during flight using the shift and control keys, or I can hit the Z and X keys to auto full throttle and auto cut throttle. I think it's X to auto cut and Z to auto full. I'm not sure. You might want to check that out yourself. Let's check the staging here. We've got our main engine, we've got our SRBs firing. They ditch our main engine, we ditch that, and then our orbital insertion stage will launch. And after we decide we want to come back, we'll hit the decoupler, getting rid of the tank and the engine. And as we fall to Earth and we get closer to the ground, but not too close and not too far away, we'll activate the parachute. Spacebar is your staging button. You hit that every time you want to go to the next stage. You can see we're going full tilt now. Here's our speed indicator. It lets us know how fast we're going relative to the ground. And at the top of the screen, you'll see that is our altitude. Here we've got some Mach effects. That means we're going faster than the speed of sound, I believe, or at least approaching it. I'm going to let our speed decrease a little bit and then ditch the SRBs. Why? Because if we move too fast through the atmosphere, that means we're not moving efficiently. We'll be fighting the atmosphere, burning a lot of fuel, and that's no good. I don't know what that explosion was, but whatever, let's move forward. W, A, S, and D are our directional keys. D to the right, A to the left, W nose down, S pull back. You'll see that it's pretty hard to control this. It's because our little flaps really don't have a lot of control authority, but it's enough to get us tilting over so that we can start heading in a horizontal direction. Why do we want to go fast sideways? Because staying in outer space is not about being far away from your planet, but going so fast that as gravity affects your craft and you fall toward the massive body, you actually end up missing the massive body before you hit the ground. That's an oversimplification of how it works, but just trust me when I say going fast sideways is important, and more important even than being higher up or farther away from the massive body. Hitting the M key will give me this view. This is the highest point of our projected flight. You'll see that it's going down a little bit, or it's going down rather steadily. That's because we're still going through the atmosphere, which is indicated by this blue bar here. At the rightmost, that's the thickest, and as we go towards space, it'll go down and we'll not have to fight the atmosphere so much. You'll notice that it's a lot easier to turn your rocket now because you don't have those atmospheric forces acting against you. I'm turning well over to the side here because, as I said before, we want to start going fast sideways. We've run out of fuel. We hit the space bar to ditch our stage when we need to. Our apoapsis, represented by the AP there, is pretty high up. We want to ditch this ascent stage by hitting the space bar. We can start using that little engine to do our orbital insertion stage. We're going to circularize our orbit. Actually, we don't even have an orbit right now. But when I go to map view, if you look at this arch, the highest point represented by that little chevron or tag or arrow, however you want to refer to it, is represented. That's because the lowest point of our orbit is still inside the planet. That arch is actually half of a imaginary circle. The quicker I go sideways, the farther away from the planet that the lowest point on that circle gets. You'll see as I'm burning sideways, that arch starts to not be so steep, starts to shallow out a little bit, starts to even out. You'll want to keep watching the numbers on the apoapsis. To get out of the atmosphere of Kerbin, to be really safely out of it, you want to hit at least 70K. So that's 70,000 meters above the surface of Kerbin. As I continue to burn, that will continue to climb. Now I can reorient my spaceship so that that doesn't climb, but it's really hard. You're going to end up going further and further away the faster you go. You can see I've outlined the imaginary circle there with the mouse pointer. And we're going and going and going, and then right about there in the center of Kerbin is the lowest point on our orbit. There, the little blue sphere has shown us where it's going. As I go faster and faster and faster, you'll see this starting to head outside the other end of the planet. It looks like we don't have a lot of fuel there, but we're not really thinking about fuel so much as what is called delta V. That's the change in velocity that we can impart on our vessel. And there we go. Periapsis, that's the lowest point on our orbit, has emerged from the planet. Usually I like to go so far as to have them flip not all the way, but on either side of the planet. That usually means that the difference between the two is not so great. And here we are in orbit. You see Valentina's pretty happy about it. If you hit the C key or hit the view right over there with the mouse, you can go inside and take a look around. Not too spectacular inside the Mark I. It's more safe than it is scenic. Oops, saw an eyeball there. That's weird. Well, there's the other one. And we can just stay here in game veritably forever. Look, there's the moon. We'll get there, ladies and gentlemen. We will get there. I want to turn off SAS. Now, this is to show you how much impact this has on the beauty of our travel. I just tapped the D key, and my ship is moving. I'm tapping the W key, and my ship is moving more. And it will continue to move in those directions with those energies until I turn it back on. And the stability assist will say, no, we don't want that. Right? Stability assist is more to save confusion and more to have precise flight maneuvers than anything else. Let's say we decide that we want to go back to Kerbin now. We can increase the speed by hitting the greater than key or the period key on the keyboard. We can also just mouse over the little green arrows up there and select the speed we want. I'm going to the other side of Kerbin. That's the side opposite the Space Center. And now I'm going to point retrograde. That means I'm going to point opposite the direction that my ship is traveling. If I point in the opposite direction, that means I'm going to be decreasing my horizontal velocity and therefore no longer maintaining a stable orbit. These little red buttons on the side here allow us to do that rather proficiently. I click that and boom, I'm facing backwards. If I fire and burn my engine facing the opposite direction, that means I'm counteracting all the force I put in getting into orbit, or effectively decelerating. If I do that, you'll see that the periapsis starts to move further away from me. That's because the highest point that I'm going to be is where I'm at, and the lowest point is projected. I'm going to stop when I reach maybe 45 or somewhere between 45 and 25 kilometers above the flight center. That means that I won't have to rely on fuel, burning fuel anymore to slow down, because I'll be inside the atmosphere. The atmosphere will do all the work for us, eventually slowing us down to where we're falling pretty much at a vertical angle towards Kerbin. Speeding up time just to make this easy on the eyes, and the time acceleration will default stop once we hit a certain altitude. I can keep my fuel and use it to slow down a little bit further, but I think what I'm going to do instead, for the sake of this example, is just stage it away. I think it's probably safer to stage it away now. That way, if we enter Kerbin's atmosphere, the air won't shove it right back into our face. You'll see our heat shield there with an ablative coating on it, which means that as we enter and catch fire, The shield will burn away and we will not. At any point in your flight, you can right click on a part and have some options. You can see here I've got 200 ablative shielding, and I also have the option to jettison the shield. And, typically that's done in the real world. We don't really have to do it in Kerbal Space Program. It's for those who want to have that hyper-realistic experience. There's also science that we can do from within the capsule. That is for career mode, for accumulating science. That'll help us unlock technologies later. I just show you this now, so in case you want to try career mode. To no avail here, except for like funny little readings that you get when you try science out. I'm just speeding up my video here to make this as painless an experience as possible. You actually can increase the time warp speed once you're inside a certain range of Kerbin, but you can only do it up to 4 times original speed, not the 50 and 100 that we were using before. You'll look at the top here and you'll see that our little indicator, atmosphere indicator, is creeping ever to the right, indicating that we are getting further and further into Kerbin's atmosphere. As we do so, make sure you're facing retrograde. If you face the wrong way, the wrong thing will be heating up, and that would be our parachute. That would be bad. You can actually right-click on the ablative shield there and watch the ablative shielding creep down, being burned away by the atmosphere as we re-enter it. Again, speeding up the video because this takes a long time. And then here you'll start to see a little bit of red flame starting to peel off the side of our vessel. That's the beginning of a very long and turgid and violent re-entry into Kerbin's atmosphere. Don't worry, our ablative shielding will keep us safe. You can watch the periapsis now start to decrease, decline, and eventually it'll move away from us. Why is it moving away? Because the highest point on our projected path will be the one that we're currently at, and our periapsis will be deep inside the core of Kerbin. There's a beautiful scene of the deserts below. I'm going to click on the view to see what it looks like to be inside a capsule that's re-entering an atmosphere. I'm sure it's very beautiful, or maybe it's not. Let's roll over here, and there's Kerbin. Oh, there we go. There's a little bit of the flame peeking past the window there. You see it's starting to get a lot hotter, a lot redder, and our speed is decelerating. Right? Eventually, as we approach the surface of Kerbin, our speed will decrease remarkably, only just over 100 meters per second. What we want to have happen, though, is touchdown at definitely beneath 8 meters per second. And if you think about that, a meter is just past a yard. And if you're doing 8 of those in 1 second, that's quite a fall. That's like falling off the top of your house. We don't want to fall from the top of our house in this $1 million device. We want to just barely tiptoe down so that we can possibly use it again. And also, we don't have our teeth shattered as our mouths close together from force. I'm speed the video up a tiny bit here. Alright, so I'm going to right click on the ablative shield, and you'll see that the numbers are starting to decrease there, indicating that our shield is working. If it's burning, it's working. One thing you want to be very cautious about, and I had some students tell me that they couldn't figure out how parachutes work, is opening the parachute too early or going too quickly. If you see red, don't open your parachute. That means it's just going to get ripped off. Now, when the game first came out, you could open your parachute whenever you wanted. Also, there was no fear of being burned up alive. In fact, heat shields weren't introduced until much later. I think it was like 1.1, the 1.1 release. So over here on the left, you'll see that the parachute icon is beat red. That's, universally stop. Don't do it. No. As we slow down, and as the flame effects, the reentry effects start to dissipate, that's when you want to keep an eye out. You don't want to hit it still. You don't want to hit it too early, because that means you'll be floating in the air for a long time. And in the real world, that means you might be carried off of where you thought you were going to be landing. But in Kerbal Space Program, it just means you're going to have to wait a long time for your ship to hit the ground, and that's the only time that you can recover the vessel and end the mission. Otherwise, your only choices are to restart the mission. You saw that I held up some options there for the parachute, messing with pressure and altitude settings. Don't mess with that just yet. We'll talk about that more and more as Club continues. I'm going to speed up the video a little bit here. because as thrilling as being inside a fireball is, it's just boring to play in Kerbal Space Program. Now, you'll see that the parachute icon is red, but as we get closer and the Mach effects disappear, it'll go from red to yellow to gray. Gray means have at it, launch that sucker. So it's turned gray. I'm going to go ahead and wait till about 3,000 meters above the surface of Kerbin. That altimeter up there, that altitude indicator, lets us know how far above Kerbin's surface of water we are. So don't let that get too low. For instance, I'm going to hit it right now, but I guarantee that it's a slow open, and there's a moment where you start to freak out like, oh my god, my Kerbal, no. Yeah, just in the nick of time here, because those mountains are above sea level. That altimeter up there is not going to hit 0 when it hits the ground. It'll hit 0 when we hit the water. We're hitting mountains here, so it's always safe to open pretty soon after you get the gray indication on the left-hand side of the screen here. Now, it's just a slow descent to the surface. You can time warp, but it's still an inexorable, slow descent to the surface. I always like to turn off time warp just before you hit the ground, because you never know. It could crash the game, or it might be confused. Once you hit the ground, you're done. You can mouse up to the top above your altimeter, and 2 options will appear, and that's to recover the vessel or go to the flight center. I'm going to pop out here by hitting EVA. That's extravehicular activity. We can walk around, we can do some science, but more cool than any of those is planting the flag, which indicates our victory over space-time. That's it. You can name your flag and put a little description when it's there. I unceremoniously knocked my flag over. It's because I think I'm sliding downhill. But if you have any comments or questions, or you're still a little confused about low Kerbin orbit and how to attain it, leave a comment below, shoot me an email, type it up in Classroom, i.e. get in touch with me. And thanks for watching. And if you really, really want to, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please do it.